Welcome to episode 2 of the Various and Sundry podcast. I am your host, Matt Harmon, joined in studio, as always, by my good friend and partner in podcasting, the one, the only, John Sloat.
What's going on, Doc?
Well, it's a brisk Tuesday morning here in the lovely Winona Lake, Indiana area.
Yeah, here on the campus of Grace Theological Seminary.
You could even say filmed live.
Filmed live, recorded live.
Indeed.
But not produced live.
No, not at all. So we're on to episode 2. Hard to believe that these are actually making it out into the world, and been encouraged by the initial response.
Yeah, people seem pleased, or they're lying to us. One of the two.
Yeah, either way, it still puts up the numbers, right? So we'd love to have you reach out and get in touch with us if you have suggestions for content or things we should talk about, or you just want to tell us we're wrong about something.
Yeah, you love a good snarky comment.
Yeah, absolutely. So the show has a Twitter feed at V&S Pod. So we'd love for you to check that out. Go ahead and follow us on Twitter. And our personal Twitters are also pretty easy to find. I am at Doc Harmon, and you are?
At John _ Sloat.
Yeah. And you can always email the show at variousandsundrypodcast at gmail.com. So, episode 2 today, and we are recording the day after the national championship game for college football.
Yeah, and you were earlier before pre-show bemoaning how late it was on.
Yeah, it's probably Eastern time zone problems, but the game starts at 8:00, a little after 8 actually, and I finally checked out at about midnight with about half of the fourth quarter left to go. So it was already pushing 4 hours at that point.
And it was pretty well wrapped up at that point.
Yeah,
as well, right?
LSU was up 17, and there was no reason to think that Clemson was going to be able to mount a significant comeback.
So Joe Burrow wins his national championship, wins the Heisman as well.
Yep.
Is he the greatest college quarterback of all time? I've heard that thrown around on Twitter a little bit.
Yeah, well, okay. This is where I'm going to put on my curmudgeon my curmudgeon hat.
Yeah, you're showing your age, yeah.
And simply say that we live in an age of ridiculous overhyping of things, especially in the sports world. So if you watch with any consistency, ESPN, FS1, any sort of sports, you listen to sports podcasts, sports radio, whatever it might be, you can almost take it to the bank that every week or every other week, there's going to be, was that the greatest? Fill in the blank. Was that the greatest shot we've ever seen?
Sure.
Was that the greatest catch we've ever seen? Was that the greatest team that's ever been? And I just get weary of it. Like, I just feel like we're way too close to it. Let's step back after 6 months, a year, 5 years, and go, let's see how that holds up historically before we're like, oh, he's the greatest college quarterback ever.
Yeah.
Like, let's pump the brakes.
I think that's fair, particularly with the changing of offenses and philosophies across football, not just college, but also pro. Things have changed.
Yeah. And, some of these season records. Well, now Joe Burrow played 15 games.
Yeah.
So, he broke the all-time record for touchdown passes in a season, held by Colt Brennan from Hawaii, which I think he did that in either 12 or 13 games. Okay. Well, you get 2 extra games, that helps, So some of these season records feel a little meaningless to me, to be honest, because you're just playing more games. Just like in baseball when they switched from, 154 to 162, I think.
Yeah.
Now you start to evaluate home run records and those sorts of things. You're like, well, you get 8 extra games. So, that should put some historical perspective on things. But I will say Joe Burrow, former Ohio State quarterback, transferred out to LSU. And one of the interesting things about Joe Burrow was the fact that from his Heisman speech, where he mentioned the poverty that he grew up around there in Athens, Ohio, Southeast Ohio, a lot of good has come out of that. Significant money has come in to donations for food banks and stuff. And so it is fun to see him use his platform for good. in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And also NFL playoffs this past weekend.
It was a great weekend for NFL playoffs.
Very entertaining, and upsets.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. The Titans game
Remember the Titans,
was incredible.
Yeah. I again, you'll see my Ohio State bias coming through, but Mike Vrabel, former Buckeye, is the coach of the Titans, doing a shockingly good job. No one saw this coming.
Yeah, and they don't play a modern style of football.
No, it's old school.
They hand the ball off 20 to 25 times a game. They throw the ball when they need to. They play really good defense. They create turnovers.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, that's held up this playoffs. The teams that can run the ball and play good defense, the 49ers are very much in that camp as well. I think one thing that I was shocked with is how large of a human being Derrick Henry is.
He's monstrous.
He looks like a large linebacker playing running back.
Yeah.
He's huge.
And remarkably fast for a man that size.
Remarkably fast and punishing. It looked like toward the fourth quarter, the Ravens were saying, the offseason really isn't that far away.
Right.
I don't have to tackle him.
Why risk
out.
injury for tackling him at this point? Yeah.
But I am glad that the Houston Texans lost because I did not want to see an AFC South AFC Championship game this weekend. And I actually saw some snarky people on Twitter saying that they were going to flex that game to London or, flex another game into that primetime spot.
Yeah.
So, I thought that was funny.
Yeah, and you'll have your contrast of styles with the Chiefs and the Titans going at it. So very much sort of modern, fast-paced, spread the ball around offense versus the Titans sort of ground and pound offense. So that'll be a nice contrast in style. And then on the other side of the bracket, you've got Green Bay and San Francisco, two basically traditional powers.
Sure.
And the question, it's interesting, in both these matchups, you've got one quarterback who is widely regarded as one of the best in the league, Mahomes in the AFC, Rodgers in the NFC, playing against quarterbacks who are question marks, honestly.
Sure.
Garoppolo in San Francisco, and then obviously Tannehill, whose career has had a remarkable resurrection.
Yeah, since leaving Miami and Adam Gase behind. Yeah. Since leaving Adam Gase behind, his career has flourished. I don't know.
Indeed. Before we move on from the sports, I think it's good to put a placeholder here. Yesterday there was some huge breaking news in the world of baseball.
Oh, I'm so excited to talk about it.
And just for the sake of having time to devote to it, we're going to table that, but we are going to come back to that about the Astros getting absolutely crushed by the MLB.
The coach was suspended for a year, the GM was suspended for a year, and then the owner came in and fired them.
Yeah. So we'll cycle back.
I'm excited
either
to talk
next
about
week
that.
or soon to get to that story. But our main topic, I would say, for today, as we have thought about some of the different things that have caught our attention, we're constantly watching, trying to keep an eye on trends in the church, trends in culture. And so our topic today was really prompted by, I think you sent me this article. Is that right? Were you the one that found this?
Perhaps. I do read this website regularly.
Yeah. So there was an article on the 538 website that basically... and why don't you tell me a little about 538 before we dive into the article?
So 538 was founded, it was either Obama's first term or second term. Around the election season, Nate Silver was working for the New York Times, and by using data and polling, actually predicted which way every state would go, and he predicted them correctly.
In 2012.
Was it 2012?
Not 2016.
No. 2000. It was either 2008 or 2012. I can't remember which. But he predicted all of them correctly, which there's 538 electoral votes. So that's where they get their name.
Yep.
And their focus is to do things that are data-driven. So they're looking
Correct.
at research and interpreting that into some kind of journalism. They're great follows on Twitter. Their website is interesting. And when he did this, he was working at the New York Times. He put his website out there and said, highest bidder, I'll come be at your site. And actually ESPN was the highest bidder. And they said, you do whatever you want, just have a sports section. And he said, Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that's why he's hosted by ESPN.
It's a good gig.
Which I think is fascinating and fantastic. And I love reading their predictors on who's going to win what bowl games or playoff games, percentages, all those things are fascinating.
So the specific article we're going to talk about today, which will be a sort of launching point into a broader topic,
Sure.
is entitled "Millennials Are Leaving Religion and Not Coming Back." So this was posted December 12th, so relatively recent here.
Yeah.
But this is not the first article along these lines. This is a sort of growing trend that various people have identified and talked about. So given the fact that one of our main interests is sort of the life and ministry of the church and cultural engagement, it seemed like this would be a good topic for us to discuss.
And I am a millennial. I'm like right in the thick of it.
You are our resident millennial.
Yes.
I am not.
So the millennials generally, I think this article says 81 to 96 are sort of the birth years.
Yep.
I've always said it as millennials are ones who remember 9/11 as being formative in their childhood at some point.
Okay.
That's how I've always sort of had my line.
Yeah. Though I think what was the definition I saw? Was it 81 to 90? You said 96?
81 to 96.
Yeah, if you're on the very end of that,
it's getting tough.
It's getting tough to make 9/11 that sort of defining. But it's a helpful, helpful sort of quick reference
and
guide.
people disagree about that. Some people say, the line is like, you were born before 9/11, you're a millennial. There's a lot of debate about it.
But the larger point of the article is highlighting this trend that millennials are leaving the church.
Yeah.
And so why don't you talk a little bit about maybe your thoughts on the article here. We'll have links to the article in the show notes so you can follow up with tracking these articles, because we'll mention a few, I think, here. But what sort of stood out to you as someone, in one sense, being talked about?
Yeah. I think I was – they talk about, obviously, the United States. And I think it's important to remember that different parts of the United States are different. The Midwest –
That's an important point,
yeah. The Midwest is going to have a very different feel to that than the Northeast or the Southeast.
Right.
Or the West Coast or the remainder of the country. So I think most of this can be seen on the coast more, probably the East Coast and the West Coast.
Right.
But they make the argument that for generations, people in their college years and post-college years fall away from religion, stop going to church. And then when they have families and kids, they begin to come back. And sometimes they will marry a spouse who's religious, and that person will bring them back into religious standing. And I believe that the reasoning goes, my children need some kind of moral grounding. And we need to have a faith in God and be a part of a religious community in order to really ground our children in a good moral standing. Yeah,
and that's something I want to come back to eventually here as we talk about this. I think that one of the things that struck me about this particular article is how much the data seems to indicate that the parents of millennials and how the parents raised the individual millennials was a huge factor in whether or not they ended up coming back to church.
Yeah, I think it was something like 84% of parents who brought their children to a Protestant church, those children continued to come to
when
church.
It was both parents.
When it was both parents, yes.
Correct. And that's another interesting dynamic, is that it's not just one parent, but two parents that really makes the sort of dramatic statistical difference. And so, that's one factor. It does dip in a little bit to some of the reasons, perhaps, why millennials are not returning back to church, or are sort of leaving and then not coming back. So, one of the things that comes out in this article is, you mentioned one of them in terms of the spouse, whether they end up marrying someone who's religious or not. But it's interesting to me that so much of this is grounded in what their parents did as a sort of strong influence upon them when it comes to whether they end up cycling back to their sort of religious roots.
Yeah, and like so many other things, it goes back to this baby boomer generation and how they've responded and how they have acted really impacts millennials, and still to this day. I mean, not just in religion, but in politics, in culture, in a number of areas, boomers are impacting us and will for years to come.
Right. So let me ask you, you being our resident millennial.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, you have not left the church. You're
I would not work at Grace Seminary if I had left the church.
Very much rooted in the church, which is a good thing, obviously. But you obviously have friends and extended acquaintances,
Sure,
who have either left the church or have at least in some ways departed from their evangelical roots, either in college or post-college, as they've sort of matured further beyond their college years and gotten married or gotten into the workforce, etc. So, what are some of the reasons you see or you are seeing among friends, acquaintances for why some of these, what we might call former evangelicals, or at least millennials raised in evangelical homes, are walking away from either the church or religion, or however you want to frame that?
I would say for some, I know some that grew up in Christian school, in Christian churches, who felt as though they were lied to about a number of things, whether it would be how sex works, how safe sex works, how evil the secular world is. I know one in particular who struggled with that even at his wedding, going, I want religion to have no part of it, when his parents are quite religious and a number of his friends are. And his wife, quite religious as well. And then others, I would say, and I don't necessarily want to dip into this too much, but based on politics, I have a number of good friends that are leaving. I would say evangelicalism because of some of the rhetoric of politics surrounding refugees and immigrants, and a number of other topics as well.
Yeah. One of the things that caught my attention, even just in reading this article, and again, this is from a secular source, so this is not from any sort of religious perspective, but even in this article, and there's another article we might talk about, that even those who are secular, when they address this topic, have concerns about this trend.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. That they have concerns about losing what they perceive as some of the positive benefits that some measure of religious grounding provides in culture.
Yes.
And so this is maybe just me, but I find myself thinking that when that becomes the talking point, in one sense, the issue is already well beyond where it should be. Meaning that even in those conversations, it becomes, what is the sort of pragmatic benefit? The questions of truth, questions of sort of big picture worldview are no longer on the front burner. It's, well, yeah, we want religion to have some role because it grounds people in some measure of morality, and so it has some sort of larger cultural benefits. So this is not a good thing that these millennials are abandoning church or religion.
Yeah, it's the argument reminded me of basically Benjamin Franklin's take, which was, I'm not a religious person, but I think the morals that are baked into religion is really, really excellent. Civic responsibility, community involvement. That seems to be the argument that I think you're referring to the Washington Post article.
Well, it's hinted at even here in the 538 article at the end in terms of just the loss of the benefits of that. Though even kind of presenting that as, well, this is one of the things that millennials are rejecting, of you need religion to get grounded morals, right? That part of the previous generation was, well, one of the values of getting that kind of exposure to church and religion was the fact that it gave you morals, and morals are good for culture. And millennials are saying, at least some of these are saying, well, why do you have to go to the church to get that? We can find other sources of morality, and
Yes.
that the sort of institutionalized church is not living up to the kind of morals we want anyway, so why should we go to them as a source for morals?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think they do believe that they can get morality elsewhere. I would say a number of my friends are that have left the church are very zealous in their desire for morality, quite zealous in their desire for morality. However, my question is always, by what standard?
Right.
What are we going back to here? Is this a feeling? Is this sort of the waves of culture? And then what happens when that morality shifts over a generation?
Correct. And I think that when those kinds of discussions often happen, it seems to me that it very much becomes a morality of one's own making, that you are still at the center of your own universe in those kinds of approaches, that those kinds of approaches rarely have room for, or at least I want to push back and say, can you give me an example of something that you thought was right or wrong, and then you changed your mind because of evidence or because of some sort of authority beyond yourself to say, I used to think this was wrong, but now I think it's right based on this authority. And that really shows itself in views on cultural issues, which even are hinted at a little bit in some of these articles, but not explicitly really dealt with. I mean, the 538 article does mention lack of tolerance as one of the sort of factors in some people abandoning the church.
Yeah, and I would say for the people that I know that have walked away, lack of tolerance may be something that they say, but I think it's the open aggression to people who are different than you. I think that's the bigger turnoff for my millennial friends who have walked away from religion and church.
So what you're saying is that as long as someone were not aggressive in their, say, advocacy of what a biblical sexuality would look like. In other words, to say, we're not talking, and I know you're not saying this. This is obviously the extreme of like the fringe groups that are out there.
Don't make me a caricature, Matt.
No, you're not. No. But that you've got the fringe groups of these sort of God hates homosexuals kind of fringe group. Okay, so we're not talking about that. But maybe someone like how aggressive does one have to be before can someone say, I think you're wrong that it's okay for a man and a man to marry. I think it's wrong for a man to decide, even though he is biologically male, he wants to be female, and so he gets to demand to be identified as a female.
Sure. I think as long as and I can't speak for all millennials on this.
Well, I'm talking about your circle of acquaintances extended out.
Yeah, I know that the way I talk about the gay marriage discussion or anything, I try to have a listening attitude and tone that goes along with that, where they felt heard, and we can parse out our disagreements and have a productive conversation that leads to some sort of understanding that we don't agree, but we know why we don't agree.
Right.
And those have been beneficial. There's respect. There's openness. I think it's some of the aggressive older individuals in the church that have made this a much more difficult conversation.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Though I think I would push back with in some ways, I think the people who tend to respond more on the aggressive, more confrontational level probably feel like, and I'm not putting myself in that category, but I'm saying I think they probably feel like they are matching the level of intensity and aggression on the sort of liberal end of things, where it's living in a culture that is at large saying, not only are you wrong to say that that two men cannot or should not marry, or two women should not marry each other, but that you are intolerant and you should not even really have much of a say in our culture. Because what's striking is, if you go back and look at what, say, for example, President Obama believed, or at least he said he believed, about gay marriage back in 2008. He was a defender of traditional marriage back in 2008. And in 2012, he changed his position when he was running more, he kind of sort of came around or whatever. And we're just 10 years removed from that, a little over 10 now, almost 12, but like a decade. And now we're to a point where someone who advocates for traditional marriage and says, yeah, actually, traditional marriage is right and biblically grounded, and contemporary trends are not, that you are almost dismissed as Neanderthal for holding a view that 10 years ago was mainstream. 10 years ago was mainstream.
Yeah, and my pushback to that is, like, frankly, I don't think it's a very Christian response to go, oh, I'm just going to match your level of anger and aggression because you're angry and aggressive. They don't have the spirit. We do. I think there's a demand for civil discussion in the face of aggression.
Right.
So I just don't see that as a great response by some of those people. People that are indwelled by the Spirit are supposed to be people of self-control. And frankly, I don't think they're matching the level of aggression is really helping the conversation.
Yeah. Well, we're wandering dangerously close to politics, so
I know.
I want to walk away from that. And I want to move to a related topic in sort of looking at some of these trends. One trend among millennial evangelicals is that some who are raised in that context, they're not leaving the church altogether. They're not leaving religion or anything like that altogether. But they're moving away from sort of traditional evangelical churches to more liturgical traditions.
Yeah, we've seen this with our own students. We've seen this. I've even had conversations across denominational lines where a friend of mine in Grand Rapids says, yeah, I'm watching a good number of my friends who are Protestant move toward a more liturgical services in Anglican or in Orthodox or even Catholic.
Yeah. So why do you think that is? I've got some thoughts, but what do you think is attracting at least a chunk of millennials raised in an evangelical context to abandon that and say, I want to move more towards these more liturgical traditions?
Yeah, I don't know. My guess would be that I think millennials grew up in a church that was very production-driven and long for something that's really grounded in deep history and where every aspect of the service has some kind of meaning and rhythm to it that is deeply founded in the history of that church or movement. Yeah. That's my guess. And sometimes those services can spiral into ritualism, but sometimes if you're able to reflect on what's going on, it is quite moving and meaningful.
Right. And I think that there is a dynamic there of a depth that maybe was lacking in some of the evangelical backgrounds that these students are coming out of and saying this just feels shallow, whether it's in terms of the preaching, whether it's in terms of just the content of the service itself. And part of what I think is probably going on to some degree is as the evangelical church, at least among a chunk of it, try to, in essence, mimic the culture, these students are like, why would I go? I can get a better version of that in the culture. So give me something that I can't find in the culture. And they see these more liturgical traditions of Orthodox or even more, higher church like Anglicanism or Episcopalian or even Catholic, and they see that as that's different, and it's I think there ironically can be an attraction to what is perceived as a kind of mysticism embedded in that or connected to that.
Yeah, I agree. Not much more to say on it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess part of the question is then, what does that mean for us as evangelicals? Are there, and again, I am not a subscriber to the put the finger in the air, figure out how the wind is blowing, and then make radical changes to the church to try to keep people around or attract new people. That's not my gig. But if there is an indication of something that we need to be aware of, and I think there's this trend, I think it's fair to ask, are there things that we as evangelicals can do that don't compromise our identity and our commitments, and still try to, in one sense, scratch that itch of recognizing that there is this hunger. Maybe that's a better way to put it.
Sure. And I assume you mean more than just, hey, let's have a more liturgical service. And
correct.
And I think we can take elements of liturgy and incorporate them into our services. And I think we can have professional, and I actually think our church does a very good job of this, have a professional service that doesn't try to mimic the culture, but is also like, hey, these are for people living in 2020. So
that's what you mean by professional. Because when I hear professional, what I tend to gravitate towards is hearing the almost like the church growth movement of it's got to be slick, it's got to be packaged, it's got to be high quality, it's got to be that. And I don't think that's what you're saying.
No. I think it just needs to be excellent. Like it needs to be well done. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with a band getting together, putting together a wonderful set. However, I think we get out of line when we try to create an atmosphere with smoke and lights, and we're driving motorcycles on. It feels gimmicky. I was in a church where a pastor did that one time. And so I think, my goodness, we can just have a professional, $1,000 a service Sunday morning, and still attract people and be more about what we're teaching than how we display things or interact.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think there is definitely a danger in the liturgy trend, right? I think that, and even those who are advocates of it, if they're relatively self-aware, will acknowledge, hey, liturgy can quickly become ritualism, right? It can easily just become a sort of ritual that you go through, that you check the boxes. You're like, oh, I come in, we have this reading, we light this candle, the priest or the pastor says this.
Sure.
That can easily turn into ritualism.
Sure, and that's what's happened across Europe with Catholicism,
right?
In a lot of ways.
Yeah. So anyway, we have there's much more we could talk about with that.
Yeah, we could keep going. And
we will post links in the show notes of some of these articles that we've read and reflected on and thought about. But I think it'd be good for us maybe. I'll give a final thought or two on this, and then give you an opportunity to do that, and then we should probably land the plane here. But I think that one of the takeaways for me is that as evangelicals, we need to do a better job of presenting the person of Christ as compelling to follow, right? That he's beautiful, he's glorious, and he's worth our lives. And to think more carefully about some of the specific ways that or what it really looks like to follow Christ in our contemporary culture that goes beyond surface level pat answers to difficult questions.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like I think for a number of millennials growing up, it was very much focused on, all right, in order to be a good Christian, do X, Y, Z. And
Right.
Here's 3 trends to being a good dad, or here's 3 trends to being a good husband, or whatever it may be. And I think we need to show a compelling version of Christ, and we need to see him as beautiful, as you said. And I think that's the way forward, and I think that's probably the way forward until he returns.
Right. Though we can't leave. I think that one potential danger of that is if you just say that, that, if each week you're coming in and hearing great preaching on how amazing Christ is, that's good. But if there's no because he's amazing and beautiful and glorious, here's how he calls you to live. And that's what it looks like as you walk into work Monday morning. This is what it looks like as you relate to your neighbors. This is what it looks like as you think about these sort of cultural issues of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Here's how your worldview and your mindset needs to be thinking about those larger issues. Because I do think one reason that people depart or at least walk away is they feel like you're not even talking about issues that I'm wrestling with or even connecting with. And there feels like this disconnect between, sure, Jesus might be great, but I don't know what to do with that. And that doesn't help me with walking into my difficult work situation or larger cultural issues or things like that. So
Right. And it's a, for lack of a better term, balancing act, because I felt like that's all I grew up with was, hey, do these things at church, do these things at work, do these things at school, do these things here or there, and Jesus is there. Absolutely, he is with you, but he's sort of like this feeling that's out there, that somehow guides me. Yeah.
Right. Well, since this is episode 2,
we got to pick an athlete.
We got to have an athlete. So let's mention a few that we've sort of considered that sort of made the final cut of thinking about.
So we have on our list, we have Derek Jeter.
Yeah.
New York Yankees. Pains me to have him on the list as a Mets fan. He owns the Miami Marlins now, so he's even larger than just playing, shortstop in the Bronx.
Right.
We also have Rick Barry.
Yeah.
Who's famous for his free throw style.
Old school NBA player, way back in the day.
We also have Moses Malone on the list of potentials. And I don't know that much about Moses Malone, partly because I'm not a huge basketball fan, but
well, he was a pretty significant center, played almost 20 years in the NBA, and won 5 or 6 rebounding titles in the NBA. Was on a championship team with Dr. J in '83, I think, with the Sixers, and was he was a force down low. And thinking old school, right? Old school centers, not guys who stretch the floor and shoot threes, but
back to the basket.
Exactly, guys who never left the paint really in terms of their offense and defense. Was a phenomenal rebounder and a pretty significant player in the NBA for years. And then another NBA player that we at least talked about.
Yeah, Jason Kidd.
A little bit more contemporary in the sense that his career was in the 90s and early 2000s, and now he has bounced around as a coach.
He's a coach assistant coach with the Lakers now, I believe.
Yeah, he was one of the sort of bigger point guards, masterful passer, racked up lots of assists, and over the course of his career, got better as a shooter.
Yeah, developed a 3-point shot toward the end of his career. Yeah, I remember he was. My dad did fantasy basketball, late 90s, early 2000s, before it was as widespread as it is, and he had Jason Kidd on his team. I remember talking about Jason Kidd with my dad about his fantasy basketball team.
Yeah, he was he was definitely good number of triple doubles in there in his career as well. So.
Yeah. NBA, does he have a championship?
I don't think so.
He didn't get one with the Mavericks?
Was he on that team?
He might have been. Why don't you look that up while I stall?
Okay.
Regardless of who we pick here, all these are great choices. However, I think we've decided that it's hard not to go with Derek Jeter.
Yes, that's correct.
He's from Kalamazoo, Michigan, I believe, which is not far from where we're located. Played in the Yankees organization. Has one of those single-digit Yankee numbers that, if it's not retired yet, it will be.
Yeah.
And it will live in infamy as he is number two. He is number two.
He was on that Mavericks team.
Okay, I thought so.
That beat the Heat in 2011. So he does have his NBA title there.
That was a great finals.
That was a very very competitive finals, yeah.
But yeah, we went with Derek Jeter.
And your head's not going to explode as a Mets fan.
I mean, the Mets were really bad. We did lose to him in the 2000 World Series. But some of the plays he made were incredible. It's just his going into the hole to get a ground ball and then jumping and throwing is iconic.
Yes. Though I think his reputation was also helped by his sort of larger social life.
I wasn't going to bring up his dating life,
but I think that contributed to his legend.
Which I believe he's married now, right?
That I don't know.
I think he's married to a woman like 15 years younger than him. Yeah,
it could be. One thing that I do know is that he was famous for when he would host parties. He was relentless about forcing guests to leave their cell phones at the door. Like he had an area where basically all cell phones, so that
he was incredibly private. Yeah,
right. So that there would be no sort of leaking of, oh, hey, someone took a picture on their phone of a slightly awkward or inappropriate scene or something like that. That he was relentless about that. You come to my party, the phone stays at the door, and what stays in Derek Jeter's apartment, what happens in Derek Jeter's apartment stays in Derek Jeter's apartment.
Yeah, and as far as we know, I can't think of any scandals that really involved him or any big problems.
Yeah, that I'm aware of.
Which I'm sure they're out there.
I'm sure. Yeah. So let's talk about one thing we liked, and I'm going to go first because
I have a bit of a story.
Yeah, yours has a bit of a story attached to it. So our segment of one thing we like is something that caught our attention, and I'm going to go with a song. There's a song that has been done by a group called City Alight called Jesus, Strong and Kind that has really been an encouragement to me in the last few weeks. Simple, beautiful lyrics. I'd encourage listeners to go ahead and check that out on YouTube. You can find that pretty easily. So that's my one thing I like this week. What about you?
All right. One thing I like this week is a podcast that just had a second season start, but it is the podcast called Limetown.
Yeah.
And I started listening to this podcast probably the first season 5 or so years ago, and it's set up as an investigative reporter looking into the disappearance of 300 people in central Tennessee. Okay. And the journalist goes, my uncle was in this community. My uncle is one of the people that disappeared, and she begins to investigate. And I'm listening to this on a drive, I think from Tennessee to Indiana, so a long drive, and I'm listening to it, and I am just gripped by what is being said. Like, oh my goodness, that happened? Oh my goodness, that happened? And it was like, really? But it was like also believable. And so I was just believing this to be true. I called my mom in the middle of the drive. I'm like, who had lived in Tennessee. Mm-hmm. I said, have you heard of this? She goes, is that the town where the people disappeared? I'm like, yes. And so like I'm just all into this. I eventually get stopped for lunch on my drive and start Googling it and realize that the podcast is simply fake and not real, even though I believed it to be real for 5 or 6 hours.
But that was a fun 5 or 6 hours,
right? It was incredible. And the podcast is very well done. It's it is a horror podcast. Okay. Does have some language at some different times. Yep. So there's a trigger warning there for you. But worth listening to. The first season is fantastic. And they just started doing the second season.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we have definitely wandered about our
We went over our time.
I know.
Yeah.
We're
Oh,
trying,
my goodness.
folks.
We're sorry.
We're trying. But we have accomplished what we set out to do, covering our various and sundry podcasts. So until next time, the Lord bless you all real good.
Later.